The memory of that day still burns vividly in my mind, a day when my entire world seemed to crumble before my eyes, when the foundation of my life, the very person I trusted the most, revealed a betrayal so deep that it shattered the illusion of love I had clung to for years. I had believed, perhaps naively, that marriage was a sacred bond, that love meant respect, that the promises made in the quiet intimacy of our vows would protect me from such degradation. Yet there I stood in the middle of a room filled with familiar faces, acquaintances, family members, and friends, all watching in stunned silence as my husband allowed another woman to assault me, to degrade me in the most intimate, painful way imaginable. It was not merely a slap, it was a public declaration of my humiliation, a message that my worth, my dignity, and my very identity were inconsequential in his eyes. At first, I could not even comprehend what was happening. My mind froze, an icy numbness spreading through every nerve, rendering me incapable of action. I remember the sound of her hand striking my cheek, sharp and stinging, cutting through the noise of the murmurs and gasps in the room. Time slowed, as if the universe itself had paused to witness this grotesque spectacle. I could see the shock in people's eyes, the disbelief, and yet there was nothing anyone could do in that frozen moment to undo the wrong being inflicted. It was as if the world had conspired to show me my helplessness, to leave me standing there exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. My husband's laughter echoed in the room, cruel and heartless, amplifying the shame that washed over me like a tidal wave. He had become an observer of my suffering, taking perverse pleasure in seeing me diminished, my dignity stripped away in front of those I knew and cared for. His smile was not just a smile, it was a weapon, a confirmation of his betrayal, a sign that my pain entertained him, that my humiliation brought him satisfaction. In that moment, the man I had once loved with all my heart became a stranger, a predator cloaked in the guise of familiarity, someone whose loyalty and affection were mere illusions. The room, which had moments before been filled with ordinary chatter, laughter, and warmth, had transformed into a chamber of judgment and horror. Every eye seemed to pierce through me, some with pity, some with confusion, and others with a quiet, unspoken condemnation that I could barely bear to acknowledge. The presence of his mistress, the woman who had supplanted me in his affections and whose audacity knew no bounds, was a further indignity. She stood there, triumphant, her face illuminated with arrogance and satisfaction, as if the slap she delivered was a crown upon her head, a symbol of victory over me. I wanted to scream, to retaliate, to unleash the storm that raged within me, but my body remained still, my voice caught in my throat, and all I could do was feel the searing heat of embarrassment, anger, and grief intertwining into a suffocating weight. Every heartbeat pounded like a drum of shame, reminding me of the betrayal not only of the man I loved, but of the life we had built together, now reduced to ashes in an instant. As the minutes passed, though they felt like hours, I realized that the silence in the room was deafening. No one moved to intervene, no comforting words were spoken. People's eyes darted nervously, unsure of whether to act, to speak, or to look away. Their inaction, intentional or not, added layers to my suffering, reinforcing the sense of isolation that had become my reality in that moment. I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on me, the whispered assumptions about my worth, my role, and my failures as a wife. In that space, humiliation was not merely an action, it was a living, breathing presence that enveloped me, suffocating and inescapable. And yet, in the midst of this torment, a strange clarity began to emerge. Though my cheek burned from the physical pain of the slap, though my heart ached with the sting of betrayal, I became acutely aware of my own resilience. For years, I had built a life alongside a man who I believed cherished me, who I believed would protect me, love me, and honor me. Yet in this single shattering moment, those beliefs were stripped away, revealing the raw truth beneath the facade. The realization was painful, yes, but it was also empowering in a subtle, insidious way. It was as if the humiliation itself had ignited a spark within me, a quiet defiance that refused to be silenced. I lowered my eyes, a deliberate act of control, refusing to meet the gaze of the woman who had so cruelly attacked me, or the husband who had sanctioned her actions. In that simple gesture, I reclaimed a fragment of my power. To remain silent, to resist the impulse to cry, scream, or retaliate in that instant, was not weakness, it was strategy. It was a recognition that the moment, no matter how unbearable, did not define my entire existence. Though they thought I was broken, though they assumed my spirit had been shattered along with my cheek, I began to understand that humiliation, when faced with dignity and restraint, could become the seed of transformation rather than destruction. The public nature of the slap made the humiliation visceral and undeniable. There was no escaping the eyes of those present, no hiding in the shadows where shame could fester unseen. Every detail of that moment, the sound of the slap, the laughter that followed, the stunned silence of the observers was etched into memory, indelibly marking the day as a turning point in my life. Public humiliation is a unique torment. It is not merely the act itself, but the witness of others, the societal judgment, and the internalization of shame that compounds the suffering. It is an experience that forces one to confront vulnerability in its rawest form, to face the gaze of others while grappling with the betrayal of someone trusted most. Yet, in the face of such degradation, there is a certain clarity that emerges. Public humiliation exposes the true nature of those around us, their cruelty, their moral bankruptcy, and their willingness to betray trust for selfish gain. It also exposes the inner strength of the person subjected to it, the ability to endure, to rise above, and to reclaim agency in the aftermath. As my cheek throbbed and my pride reeled, I understood that the slap, while designed to break me, could not extinguish the fire within. The humiliation was temporary. The lessons, the revelations, and the awakening of my own resilience would endure far longer. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, the memory of that public humiliation became a catalyst for transformation. I reflected endlessly on the betrayal, the cruelty, and the audacity of those who sought to diminish me. I recognized the layers of deception, manipulation, and emotional abuse that had preceded that fateful day, and I began to disentangle myself from the web that had held me captive. Public humiliation had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my marriage, about my husband, and about the society that sometimes condones or overlooks such acts. It became a mirror, reflecting not just the cruelty of others, but the resilience, intelligence, and strength that lay within me, qualities I had perhaps underestimated until faced with adversity. The act of being slapped publicly, witnessed by those I knew, also became a lesson in perception. People assumed, perhaps mistakenly, that silence equated to weakness, that tears equated to defeat, but I learned that true power is often quiet, that dignity can reside in stillness, and that the most profound responses are not always visible in the immediate aftermath. The humiliation designed to shame inadvertently revealed the depth of my inner strength, my ability to endure, and my capacity to plan, strategize, and ultimately reclaim control over my own life. In retrospect, that moment of public humiliation was both devastating and enlightening. It revealed the worst in the people around me, yes, but it also revealed the best in myself. It marked the beginning of a journey from passive suffering to active empowerment, from silent endurance to deliberate action. The slap that was meant to humiliate me became the spark for self-realization, the catalyst for transformation, and the impetus for eventual revenge. It taught me that public humiliation, while painful, is not permanent. What endures is the spirit, the mind, and the courage to rise above betrayal and reclaim one's narrative. Even now, when I recount the events of that day, the sting of the slap remains a vivid memory, a symbol of the betrayal I endured, but it also serves as a reminder of the strength I discovered within myself, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of public shame. The humiliation was not the end of my story, it was the beginning of a journey toward justice, self-respect, and empowerment. A journey that transformed a moment of degradation into a lifetime of lessons, courage, and ultimate triumph. In that moment, after the sharp sting of her hand on my cheek, the immediate world around me seemed to collapse, yet there was an unexpected clarity that began to form in the depths of my mind. While the pain throbbed, while humiliation coursed through my veins like molten fire, I made a conscious choice I would remain silent. Not out of fear, not out of submission, but out of a quiet, deliberate strength that few could comprehend at that instant. Silence, in that room filled with witnesses and whispers, became my armor, my shield against the chaos and cruelty that threatened to drown me. The world expected tears, expected outrage, expected me to crumble visibly before their eyes. But I refused. I lowered my gaze, calm on the surface, though a storm raged inside, and in that stillness I found my power. The act of remaining silent in the face of cruelty is one of the most underestimated forms of strength. It is a quiet defiance, a refusal to give the abuser the satisfaction of seeing their victim broken. As my husband laughed and his mistress smirked with the triumph of her audacity, I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me. Some watched with shock, some with confusion, some with curiosity, and a few, perhaps, with judgment. Yet I knew that my silence would speak louder than any words I could utter in that moment. It was a controlled, deliberate choice to not react impulsively, to not allow anger, hurt, or despair to dictate my immediate actions. To the casual observer, silence may appear as weakness, passivity, or surrender, but in truth, it is a conscious mastery of oneself in the midst of chaos. I could feel the weight of every glance, every subtle shift of attention, yet I did not flinch. My cheeks burned, not just from the sting of the slap, but from the intensity of being scrutinized, evaluated, and, in some cases, pitied. But my eyes remained lowered, fixed on a point in the distance, unyielding, unwavering, refusing to give the aggressors the gratification of seeing my despair. In this silence, there was an unspoken assertion of control. I refused to allow the narrative of the moment to be dictated solely by my husband and his mistress. Though they had acted with cruelty and audacity, I still had agency, the power to choose how I would respond, even if my response was invisible to the untrained eye. This silent strength was not instantaneous. It was cultivated through years of navigating life's challenges, of learning resilience in private moments when no one else was watching. It was honed in the crucible of repeated disappointment, small betrayals, and quiet hardships. By the time that slap landed, I had learned to recognize that immediate reaction is often the enemy of strategy, that outward displays of anger or pain can cloud judgment and give power to those who seek to diminish you. So, in the midst of the most public humiliation of my life, I chose restraint not out of submission, but out of a deep understanding of the power of self-control. I could feel my pulse, rapid yet steady, a reminder that my mind remained intact, that my reasoning was clear even as my emotions threatened to betray me. I focused inward, seeking the center of my being where anger and grief could be processed without erupting into chaos. I reminded myself that appearances can deceive, that the world often misjudges those who remain quiet. They assumed I was broken, that my spirit had been crushed, but the truth was far more complex. Silence was my weapon, a way to observe, to calculate, to prepare for the next phase of the story, a phase in which I would no longer be the passive victim, but the agent of my own destiny. In that silence, I also discovered the profound strength that comes from self-possession. I did not need validation from those around me, nor did I seek pity or sympathy. My dignity, though temporarily wounded, was mine to reclaim. By refusing to react immediately, by keeping my gaze lowered and my body composed, I maintained an inner fortress that could not be breached by the cruelty surrounding me. This is the paradox of silent strength. It appears as stillness to the outside world, yet within it burns a fire of resilience, courage, and deliberate intention. I was silent, yes, but I was far from powerless. Moreover, the silence allowed me to observe the situation with clarity. I noted the expressions on the faces of those present, the gasps, the uncertain whispers, the avoidance of eye contact. I saw the subtle dynamics of power at play, the way my husband basked in the spectacle he had orchestrated, how his mistress reveled in her perceived victory, and how the bystanders struggled with their own judgments and inability to intervene. This observation, afforded only by my choice to remain silent, gave me insight into human behavior, into the weaknesses and strengths of those around me, and into the strategic advantage that silence can confer. By not reacting impulsively, I preserved the ability to act later, when the timing would be mine, when the impact of my actions could be measured and decisive. There is also a spiritual dimension to silent strength, one that resonates deeply with the teachings of patience, restraint, and inner fortitude. In moments of public humiliation, the temptation is overwhelming to lash out, to demand justice immediately, to seek retribution in the heat of emotion. Yet true power lies in the ability to wait, to internalize, and to let the universe bear witness to your composure. By remaining silent, I aligned myself with a higher sense of justice, one that does not rely on immediate gratification, but on the eventual restoration of balance. My silence was not passive, it was a deliberate act of moral and emotional strategy, a way to ensure that when I acted, it would be with clarity, purpose, and undeniable impact. The physical act of lowering my eyes also carried symbolic weight. It was a refusal to give my abusers the satisfaction of confrontation, a way to reclaim the narrative of the moment. While they believed they were asserting dominance, I was quietly asserting my autonomy, demonstrating that my self-worth was not dictated by their cruelty. The room, filled with hushed whispers and stunned silence, became a stage for my silent defiance. Every heartbeat, every breath, every controlled movement reinforced the truth that I was still whole, still capable, and still in command of myself despite the external chaos. Even as minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, the choice to remain silent allowed me to conserve my emotional energy. Anger, pain, and humiliation, if expressed immediately, can be fleeting and dissipate without effect. By channeling these emotions inward, I transformed them into a source of inner strength, a reservoir of determination that would fuel the next steps in reclaiming my life. In this way, silence was not merely a shield against humiliation. It became a tool for empowerment, a strategic pause that allowed me to turn the tables when the time was right. In the end, silent strength is a profound form of resistance. It defies the expectations of the aggressors, frustrates the assumptions of observers, and preserves the integrity of the one who chooses it. My lowered eyes, my composed demeanor, and my refusal to speak in that moment were not signs of defeat, but of mastery. The room, which may have interpreted my silence as weakness, could not see the storm of resilience, planning, and courage swirling beneath the surface. I had become untouchable in the most essential way, not by avoiding pain, but by refusing to let pain define me, control me, or dictate the course of my actions. That day, the slap, the laughter, the humiliation, all were external forces, temporary in their impact. My silent strength, cultivated over years and crystallized in that moment, became permanent, unassailable, and transformative. It was the first step in reclaiming my dignity, my power, and ultimately, my life. By choosing silence over immediate reaction, I had taken control, proving that true strength is not always loud, that courage can reside in stillness, and that resilience often manifests most profoundly when the world expects you to break. The moment had already begun with the sting of betrayal, yet as I stood in that room, still reeling from the slap that had struck me with both physical and emotional force, I became acutely aware of the collective weight of gazes upon me. Social shock, I realized, is one of the most profound instruments of suffering a human can endure, and it is more than just the individual act of humiliation, it is the reaction of society, of those who witness, that magnifies the pain in ways almost unbearable. In that room, filled with family, friends, acquaintances, and strangers alike, everyone bore silent testimony to my degradation, and in their silence, I felt the intensity of their judgment, the uncertainty of their response, and the quiet curiosity that only the spectacle of scandal can elicit. The collective pause, the draw, not hesitation before anyone spoke, was more agonizing than the slap itself. When someone is publicly humiliated, it is not merely the action that wounds, but the way the world perceives and internalizes it. Each pair of eyes, each subtle shift of attention, each whispered speculation forms an invisible web of scrutiny that wraps tightly around the person being shamed. I could feel it like a tangible pressure, pressing down on my chest, constricting my breath, and yet I stood firm. The eyes of others are often more piercing than any physical attack because they are a mirror reflecting both your vulnerability and society's expectations of how you should react. They expect outrage, tears, or submission. They expect you to crumble, but I had already begun to cultivate a resilience that would allow me to turn the shock into a tool of strength, though the process of enduring it was harrowing. As the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, I noticed the subtle differences in people's reactions. Some froze entirely, died, unsure how to respond, caught between empathy and the fear of entanglement. Others averted their gaze, pretending not to witness the unfolding tragedy, as if ignoring it would erase the cruelty from reality. A few whispered among themselves, carefully chosen words filtered by politeness, curiosity, or morbid fascination. And there were those whose eyes carried a quiet judgment, assessing my worth, questioning my choices, or speculating about the circumstances that had led to this moment. In their collective silence, I felt the full weight of social pressure, the unbearable spotlight of judgment that can accompany public scandal. Social shock is uniquely powerful because it magnifies the sense of isolation. Though I was surrounded by people, I felt utterly alone. Isolation does not only come from physical solitude, but from the knowledge that no one present will or can fully understand the inner turmoil you endure. The mixture of empathy, curiosity, judgment, and fear in the observers created a complex social energy that made my humiliation feel infinite. I could hear my own heartbeat, the rush of blood in my ears, the subtle tremor of suppressed emotion, and I realized that everyone in that room was now a participant in my suffering willingly or unwillingly. Every glance, every hesitation, every whispered speculation was a reinforcement of the social weight I bore, a reminder that humiliation, when witnessed, becomes exponentially more profound. And yet, in this social shock, there was an unexpected clarity. The reactions of others, or their lack thereof, revealed truths about the human condition. People are often hesitant to intervene when confronted with conflict, whether out of fear, uncertainty, or social norms that prioritize detachment over action. The silence of the room, while agonizing, became a mirror reflecting the reality of human behavior, the uncomfortable truth that many will watch injustice unfold rather than act to stop it. Their hesitation, their inability to voice outrage, revealed more about them than about me. It underscored the cruelty of passive spectatorship, the dangers of societal apathy, and the profound isolation that can accompany public humiliation. The social shock also magnified my awareness of my own composure. As I stood there, the sting on my cheek still fresh, the laughter of my husband ringing in my ears, and the triumphant smirk of his mistress glaring at me, I understood that my response was being measured by all present. The room had become a theater, the spectators a jury, and I, unwillingly, the subject of a performance I had not chosen. Every expression, every subtle movement, every choice of posture or gaze would be scrutinized, interpreted, and discussed. In that moment, I recognized the immense power of self-control. The ability to govern one's presence in the midst of social scrutiny is a profound form of strength. To remain composed when every eye is on you is to reclaim a degree of agency in circumstances designed to strip it away. The social dynamics in that room were complex, almost suffocating in their intensity. There were those who clearly felt pity, but did not know how to express it without breaking social decorum. There were those who admired the audacity of the aggressor, perhaps secretly envying her courage or boldness. And there were those whose judgment was cloaked in moral superiority, silently condemning me for my perceived inadequacies, as if the act of being humiliated revealed hidden flaws in character. The interplay of these forces created a palpable tension, a charged atmosphere in which my every movement or reaction carried amplified significance. Social shock is not passive. It is an active, almost living pressure that can shape behavior, force internal reflection, and redefine perceptions of power. Even as I stood silently, lowering my gaze and maintaining composure, I felt the subtle currents of gossip begin to form, even if only in whispers. Social shock thrives on narrative, on the creation of stories to explain events, to assign blame, to satisfy curiosity. Every eye in that room was constructing its own version of the truth, filling in gaps with assumptions and speculations. I realized then that public humiliation is not a singular event, but a continuous one, prolonged by the interpretations, judgments, and gossip of others. The physical act of the slap was merely the catalyst. The social shock, the collective processing of the event, was what made it enduring, what made it sear itself into memory, and what transformed it into a profound life lesson. Yet, amid the overwhelming weight of social shock, I also discovered an inner resilience that I had not fully recognized until that moment. The awareness that everyone was watching, judging, whispering, and speculating could have crushed me, but I chose to internalize it differently. I reminded myself that their perceptions did not define my worth. Their opinions, their judgments, and even their silence were temporary, fleeting reactions to a single event. What endured was my dignity, my composure, and my ability to act with purpose in the aftermath. Social shock, for all its intensity, cannot penetrate the inner fortress of self-possession unless one allows it. In that room, amidst the eyes and whispers, I began to solidify the understanding that true power is the ability to remain grounded even when the social world collapses around you. In time, the social shock would serve as a tool rather than a weapon against me. By observing the reactions of those present, I gained insight into human behavior, into the fragility of appearances, and into the ways in which power is exercised and perceived. I noted who remained loyal, who distanced themselves, who judged, and who remained silent, and these observations would become critical in navigating the aftermath of betrayal. The shock, though intended to harm, instead became a mirror reflecting truths that had previously been obscured, a lesson in perception, strategy, and the profound impact of societal dynamics on individual experience. Even as the sting of humiliation faded physically, the social shock lingered, shaping my awareness, my strategy, and my understanding of human relationships. It was a force that transformed me, forcing me to confront not only betrayal, but also the nature of those around me and the reactions of society at large. The collective gasp, the hesitant glances, the whispered speculations all became part of a larger narrative in which I could reclaim agency, rebuild dignity, and ultimately craft a response that would assert my power in ways that the perpetrators could not anticipate. Through this experience, I came to understand that social shock is both a test and a revelation. It exposes the cruelty and indifference of others, the fragility of social norms, and the human tendency to prioritize self-preservation over moral action. At the same time, it offers a rare opportunity for personal empowerment, for observing the dynamics of human behavior, and for cultivating a form of strength that is both quiet and enduring. While the moment of public humiliation is temporary, the lessons derived from social shock, resilience, observation, patience, and strategic composure endure far longer, shaping character and fortifying the spirit in ways that solitary struggle cannot. The cruelty of my husband was a revelation that day, a stark, unrelenting truth that cut deeper than any slap, any public humiliation, or any whisper of judgment from onlookers. I had loved him once with the fullness of my heart, believing that marriage was a sacred bond, that trust was a foundation unshakable by circumstance, and that the vows we shared were a shield against betrayal. Yet, in a single, horrifying moment, all illusions were stripped away. His laughter as another woman struck me was not only a betrayal of our shared life, it was a testament to the depths of callousness a human heart can harbor when selfishness, deceit, and lust override compassion and love. The cruel smile on his face was a weapon sharper than any blade. It communicated more than words ever could, a silent acknowledgement of the power he believed he wielded over me, a display of dominance, a validation of his mistress's audacity, and a declaration of my supposed insignificance. I stared into that smile, seeking perhaps some remnant of the man I had once known, some spark of humanity or regret, but there was nothing. Only the cold, calculating amusement of someone who saw another's suffering as entertainment, as a spectacle worthy of applause. In that instant, I realized that I had been living with a stranger masquerading as a husband, someone whose love had been conditional, fragile, and ultimately performative. The cruelty manifested not only in the immediate action, but in the deliberate orchestration of humiliation. He had allowed her, the intruder in our lives, the woman who had supplanted my place, to act with complete impunity, knowing full well the damage it would inflict on my dignity, on my composure, and on my sense of self. There was no intervention, no apology, no hint of moral compass guiding his actions. Instead, there was celebration, laughter, and the satisfaction of witnessing my pain in the most public way possible. This was not merely indifference. It was active cruelty, a willful choice to degrade, to dominate, and to diminish. It was a betrayal of the sacred trust between husband and wife, a violation of vows meant to protect, honor, and cherish. I felt a surge of disbelief, a questioning of reality itself. How could someone I had shared my life with, who had once whispered promises of love and fidelity in the quiet of night, participate in such a grotesque act of public degradation? The contrast between the man I had loved and the one before me in that moment was staggering. It revealed the fragility of human character, the capacity for duplicity, and the ease with which a person can abandon morality when personal gratification is at stake. His cruelty was not spontaneous. It was premeditated, deliberate, and designed to assert dominance over both me and the witnesses of the act. His laughter was particularly piercing because it was more than a reaction, it was a proclamation. It proclaimed ownership over me, even as it betrayed the true ownership of his desires by another woman. It claimed that my humiliation was a form of entertainment, a performance staged for the amusement of others, and that my suffering was irrelevant to his sense of satisfaction. The psychological impact of this cruelty was profound. It was not merely the slap, not merely the public degradation, but the active enjoyment of my pain that seared itself into memory. There is a distinct horror in recognizing that someone you trusted is capable of relishing your suffering. It fractures the very foundation of human connection, leaving behind a void where love once resided. Even as the physical sting of the slap subsided, the emotional pain lingered, amplified by his presence, his laughter, and his deliberate disregard for my dignity. I became acutely aware that his cruelty was a form of power, a weapon wielded not only to demean me, but to assert control over perception, over the narrative, and over the people witnessing the scene. By laughing, by smiling, by refusing to intervene, he transformed a personal betrayal into a public spectacle. His cruelty was methodical, almost surgical in its precision, designed to maximize impact, to ensure that I felt every layer of degradation while those around me absorbed the shock and judgment in silence. The cruelty also revealed a profound lack of empathy, a moral void that left no room for compassion, regret, or hesitation. My suffering, the consequences of betrayal, the lifelong bond we had formed, none of these mattered. The only priority was the satisfaction of his ego, the gratification of his mistress, and the display of dominance over a woman he had once vowed to protect. Witnessing such a lack of conscience is disorienting. It forces one to reassess not only the nature of the relationship, but also the character of the person one has trusted implicitly. The realization that someone so intimately known could act with such callousness is a psychological earthquake, shaking the very ground on which trust and love were built. Yet, amid the sting of betrayal, there was also clarity. The cruelty of my husband became a mirror reflecting his character, revealing weaknesses, insecurities, and the hollowness of his moral compass. In his laughter, I saw his need for validation, his compulsion to assert power, and his inability to value anything beyond immediate gratification. It was a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. It exposed the truth that the man I had believed in did not exist in the way I imagined. The cruelty he displayed was not an aberration. It was a manifestation of his true nature, now revealed in stark, undeniable relief. I felt anger rise, tempered by the awareness that direct confrontation in that moment would not serve me. His cruelty, while public and overt, was a performance he sought to control, and any visible reaction on my part would only reinforce his sense of dominance. Instead, I began to channel the energy of betrayal into silent observation, mental calculation, and a growing resolve to reclaim agency. The cruelty that was meant to crush me instead became fuel, a fire stoked by injustice, humiliation, and the audacity of the man I had once loved. I realized that while I could not erase the past, I could control the future, and his cruelty had inadvertently provided the motivation to act with purpose and precision. The psychological toll of witnessing such deliberate cruelty is immense. There is a deep dissonance between expectation and reality, between what love promises and what betrayal delivers. My husband's actions forced me to confront not only his capacity for harm, but also the fragility of trust, the vulnerability inherent in emotional intimacy, and the ways in which those we love most can become instruments of suffering. Yet within this painful revelation lay the seeds of empowerment. Recognizing cruelty for what it is, a reflection of the perpetrator's weakness, not the victim's inadequacy, allowed me to reclaim perspective, to differentiate between the harm inflicted and my intrinsic value, and to prepare for a response that was measured, deliberate, and just. The cruelty of my husband also served as a public lesson in character, morality, and accountability. To those who witnessed the act, his laughter, his smile, and his active participation in my humiliation exposed the darkness of his nature. Social judgment, while initially paralyzing, eventually became a tool, as the observation of his cruelty allowed me to strategize, anticipate, and reclaim control in ways that silence, reflection, and patience would later enable. The lesson was clear. Cruelty, when revealed openly, cannot hide forever. It leaves traces, impressions, and consequences that cannot be erased. Ultimately, the cruelty of my husband, while devastating, became a crucible for transformation. It revealed the starkest truths about betrayal, exposed the fragility of trust, and illuminated the character of a man who had once been central to my life. But more importantly, it illuminated the power within myself, the ability to endure, to observe, to calculate, and to reclaim agency even when confronted with the most profound betrayal. His laughter, his smile, his deliberate cruelty, all intended to break me, became instead a catalyst for awakening, a call to action, and a source of strength that would shape every step I took toward justice, dignity, and eventual vindication. The moment of betrayal, the sting of public humiliation, and the cruel laughter of the man I had loved became the catalyst for a profound internal transformation. At first, I felt shattered, broken, as though the very fabric of my life had been torn apart. The room that had once been familiar, that had been filled with comfort and love, had turned into a chamber of judgment, shame, and betrayal. Every whisper, every glance, every silence from those around me seemed to amplify the pain I felt. And yet, amid the chaos, amid the unbearable humiliation, something deep within me began to awaken, a quiet, unyielding force that would not be subdued. Transformation often begins in silence, in moments when the world believes we are at our weakest. I lowered my eyes, not out of submission, but to look inward, to confront the reality of who I was and who I needed to become. My outward calm masked an internal revolution. The humiliation that had been intended to diminish me instead became a mirror, reflecting both my vulnerabilities and my hidden reservoirs of strength. I realized that the life I had known, the love I had trusted, and the person I had believed my husband to be were no longer anchors for my identity. The foundation of my existence had been shaken, and I now had a choice: to remain a passive victim or to rise from the ashes of betrayal stronger, wiser, and more resolute. The first stage of internal transformation is recognition. I had to see clearly what had happened, without the veil of denial or self-blame. The slap, the laughter, the humiliation, these were not accidents, nor were they reflections of my inadequacy. They were the product of deceit, manipulation, and cruelty on the part of those I had trusted. Accepting this truth was painful, almost unbearable. It forced me to confront the reality of my situation and to acknowledge the betrayal without softening its edges. Recognition is the doorway through which transformation passes. Without it, the cycle of pain, denial, and helplessness continues indefinitely. I had to name the truth, face it in all its brutality, and allow it to ignite the inner fire necessary for change. Once recognition took root, it was followed by the emergence of clarity. Betrayal has a strange way of cutting through illusions, revealing the truth that has been hidden beneath layers of trust, affection, and expectation. I could see the cruelty of my husband for what it was, the audacity of his mistress for what it represented, and the passivity of the bystanders for what it suggested about human nature. This clarity was painful, yet it was also empowering. In understanding the reality of my circumstances, I regained a degree of control. Knowledge, even when bitter, is power. By observing the situation with clear eyes, I could begin to strategize, to plan, and to reclaim authority over my own life. The third stage of internal transformation is the reclamation of dignity. Public humiliation had sought to strip me of my self-respect, to reduce me to a figure of pity or mockery. Yet dignity is not granted by others, it is claimed internally. By choosing silence, by maintaining composure, and by refusing to react impulsively, I began to reclaim what had been stolen. Each heartbeat, each deliberate breath, each moment of self-possession became a testament to the fact that I was still whole, still capable, and still worthy of respect. Transformation is not merely about surviving betrayal, it is about actively asserting one's value in the face of attempts to diminish it. As I processed the enormity of what had occurred, I also recognized the necessity of emotional recalibration. The initial shock, the grief, the anger, and the despair were natural reactions, but they could not dominate my psyche indefinitely. Internal transformation requires the conscious redirection of these powerful emotions. Anger became fuel, grief became clarity, and despair became motivation. Each feeling was acknowledged, processed, and harnessed. In this way, the internal storm that had initially threatened to destroy me was converted into a force for self-empowerment, a source of determination that would guide every step toward justice and reclamation. The next phase of transformation involved the restructuring of identity. I could no longer define myself through the lens of my husband's actions or the perceptions of others. His cruelty and betrayal were external forces, transient in their ability to define me. My internal transformation required me to reconstruct the narrative of who I was, independent of their influence. I began to see myself not as a victim of circumstances, but as an agent of my own destiny. I was capable of resilience, strategic thought, and decisive action. By redefining my identity internally, I reclaimed autonomy over my life, my choices, and my future. Transformation is as much about self-definition as it is about reacting to betrayal. It is about declaring, I am more than what has been done to me. Internal transformation also demanded a recalibration of relationships and boundaries. Betrayal, by its nature, exposes the fragility of trust. I realized that not all who surrounded me were capable of honoring it. Those who had participated, tacitly or overtly, in my humiliation had revealed their true colors. Transformation required discernment, the ability to recognize who deserved proximity, loyalty, or respect, and who did not. It was a painful but necessary process, stripping away illusions about people I had once believed would protect me. Boundaries became both a shield and a declaration. I would no longer allow the actions of others to define my worth or compromise my dignity. Another crucial aspect of internal transformation was the cultivation of resilience. The trauma of betrayal and humiliation could have easily broken my spirit, leaving me fragile, fearful, or resentful in ways that paralyzed action. Instead, I chose to convert that trauma into resilience. I recognized that adversity does not diminish inherent strength. It exposes it. Each moment of endurance, each silent observation, and each deliberate choice reinforced my capacity to withstand future challenges. Transformation, therefore, is iterative. It grows with each trial, each encounter with cruelty, each moment in which one refuses to be defeated. Finally, internal transformation involved the awakening of a strategic mind. Betrayal, humiliation, and injustice demand response, but not immediate, impulsive response. Transformation required patience, observation, and foresight. By processing the events internally, I began to craft a plan for reclaiming power, dignity, and justice. Every detail of the betrayal was absorbed, analyzed, and catalogued. The humiliation, which had once been intended to weaken me, now became a source of intelligence. Transformation is not merely emotional, it is strategic. It allows one to convert suffering into actionable insight, pain into preparation, and humiliation into power. Through this journey of internal transformation, I discovered a truth often overlooked. The most profound changes occur within, unseen by the world, nurtured in the quiet moments of reflection, resilience, and deliberate thought. The external world may witness the slap, the laughter, the betrayal, and the humiliation, but it cannot perceive the internal awakening, the recalibration of identity, the fortification of self-respect, or the cultivation of a strategic mind. Internal transformation is the alchemy of pain into power, of grief into clarity, and of betrayal into agency. It is invisible, yet it is the foundation upon which future actions, victories, and reclamations are built. By the end of that day, though I appeared outwardly composed, the person within me had undergone a metamorphosis. The woman who had been stunned, humiliated, and betrayed had evolved into someone profoundly aware of her own strength, dignity, and potential. Internal transformation does not erase pain. It integrates it, refines it, and channels it into purpose. It is the turning of suffering into wisdom.